Hello, I'm Michael Brown, President of the School for Advanced Research, talking to you from my office on the El Delirio campus of this organization in Santa Fe. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to a webinar featuring Alisse, Waterston and Charlotte Corden. Alisse and Charlotte, who reflect on their collaboration in the making of the graphic narrative, Light in Dark Times, The Human Search for Meaning. This book is rooted in nonfiction and includes fictionalized encounters with writers, philosophers, activists, and anthropologists. The work is an effort to grapple with the real world concerns in an innovative format and to create an aesthetically beautiful book with a powerful story. Now to introduce our speakers. Alisse Waterston is Presidential Scholar and Professor at the City University of New York, John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She's the author or editor of 7 books, and she served as president of the American Anthropological Association from 1915 to 1917. In addition, she serves as editor of the book series Intimate Ethnography, which is produced by Berghahn Books. Charlotte Corden is an illustrator and fine artist whose work centers around what it is to be human. She's fascinated by how the power of hand-drawn images can reveal and describe complicated truths. As anthropologist and illustrator, she's worked with the British Cabinet Office and the UK's National Health Service, in addition to other organizations. As a fine artist, she studied drawing and painting at the London Fine Art Studios and at Art Students League in New York. Format is very simple today. I'm going to hand it off to Alisse, and it will be followed by a presentation by Charlotte, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. We'll probably end the webinar in about an hour from now, depending on the number of questions. Alisse and Charlotte, you're on.
Hello, everybody. Alisse, do you want to take it away?
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, first of all, to Michael for that lovely introduction and for helping arrange that we are here today, this afternoon. He's in Santa Fe and I am in New York, and Charlotte is in the UK. I'd also like to thank Ashley Flores for facilitating this event. So I'll get started. Today, the title of my talk is Communicating Difficult Topics, Art, Aesthetics, and Anthropology in Light in Dark Times. For Charlotte and me, Light in Dark Times has been a highly creative and intellectual endeavor, an effort to grapple with real-world concerns, an effort to use an innovative format to produce and disseminate knowledge, and an effort to create an aesthetically beautiful book with a powerful story. Designed to reach multiple audiences, this book of public anthropology seeks to convey the drama of the world in dark times and difficult circumstances, even as it reveals spaces of excitement, creativity, and hope. We've tried in this book to bring readers and viewers into an experience of the darknesses of the world. We did that with Charlotte's drawings, images that are her renditions of what she has come to understand about the darknesses, in part as a result of our interaction. She captured that with color, avatars, symbols, and literal representations. Of course, there is also the writing, the text, a weaving of commentary about the dark times by various actors, activists, anthropologists, political philosophers, poets, and other writers. The words are woven with the images to produce the experience, not just of the darknesses, but also of the possibilities captured in illustrations saturated with light. Underneath our experimental endeavor is an issue I think many scholars also struggle with, which has to do with how to communicate difficult topics. And by difficult topics, I mean those that are painful, as well as those that are complex, that require historical knowledge and ability to grasp abstract concepts. And of course, all of these aspects are interconnected. So, how do we attract readers who may not want to experience the pain, who may resist being brought into an experience of suffering, their own and that of others? How do we explain social suffering when the very explanation might threaten long-held, cherished beliefs, leading readers to turn away from such explanation and thus from the book? How do we offer theory on the state of the world and the human condition in terms that are accessible and still retain the integrity of our analytic tools and address our concerns about definitions and the misuse and misappropriation of fundamental concepts? How do we convey our insights, our wisdom, the things we have come to say in our works in ways understated enough to attract readers and yet explicit enough that readers receive our intended meaning? In all of my works, many of which are also experiments in writing otherwise, to use Ulf Hanners's words, I have struggled with these questions and still do as I anticipate new writing projects. I recognize it is likely I'll never be able to fully answer them, even as I must keep them front and center in my mind as I write and as I gather insights and get intellectually nourished from discussions with friends and colleagues from different disciplines, such as in this forum. I moved into this project that became the graphic novel Light in Dark Times, in part to disrupt denial about the darknesses of the past and the present, and to affirm what I believe many people sense, feel, know, or seek to know. The dark times we reference in the book's title reflects grim circumstances, those in the immediate situation and those that have been pervasive for far too long. On the eve of World War II, the dramatist and poet Bertolt Brecht wrote to posterity, "Truly I live in dark times. He who laughs has not yet received the terrible news." The statistics we have available on contemporary global hunger, on forcibly displaced people, on the numbers of dead, wounded, and sickened by war, environmental damage, and treatable and preventable disease reveal our dark times. Then there are the contexts of devastating economic collapses, ever-expanding militarism and worship of weapons, racism and nationalist fervor, irreversible climate damage, rampant power abuses, and everyday structural violence. Social, political, and economic inequities keep expanding. People are suffering stupid deaths, as anthropologist Paul Farmer puts it, while private concentrated wealth continues to expand under global neoliberal capitalism, a system that maintains conditions of scarcity and insecurity through a politics of fear and fragmentation, draconian policies, and practices that too often do more harm than good. The darknesses are there, even if some do not want to confront it. As a person on this earth for 7 decades, and immersed in anthropology for well over half my life, I recognize the urgency to demonstrate the relevance of knowledge to real world concerns and to speak truth to power, necessary if insufficient actions on behalf of a livable future that has yet to come. For decades, anthropologists have been participating in a series of interconnected debates about the discipline's disengagement from the public sphere that marked post-World War II anthropology, at least in the United States. In academic circles, these debates have been centered on the politics of representation, writing culture, calls to decolonize the discipline, and how to put knowledge to use in the interest of a more just, ethical world. Anthropologist Didier Fassan's relatively recent, that is 2008, plea for a moral anthropology reflects an intensification of the dilemmas anthropologists confront in the face of the world as it exists. Fassan's is not a new call, but a reminder that the question of the scholar's own values, assumptions, prejudices, and judgments needs to be made explicit, at least in the mind of the scholar, considering that, and now I quote Fassan, telling right from wrong and the necessity of acting in favor of the good and against the evil, closed quote, shapes the who, what, where, how, and why of any anthropological endeavor. Perhaps this is also true for other disciplines. In my view, and considering the state of the world, there is no turning back from an explicitly engaged anthropology that feminist anthropologists and those looking to decolonize the discipline have long called for. We are left to grapple with the perils and promises of engaged anthropology, to use anthropologist Kay Warren's words, which means it may expand or limit knowledge, may facilitate analysis or inhibit it, may uncover or occlude information, and may advance or hinder understanding. Amid the moral longing to do good, there is also no way to avoid critical reflexivity, no turning away from reflecting on the limitations, possibilities, and contradictions of the engaged observer. Since all modes of thinking, all modes of thought have social origins, we have a responsibility, I believe, to bring our own specific assumptions out of the shadows. This implores anthropologists and scholars in any discipline to be consistently mindful of their own centrisms and privileges. Likewise, Fassan posits that, and I quote again, the more we are conscious and critical of our own moral presuppositions or certainties, instead of keeping them in the black box of self-contentment, the more we are capable of respecting the epistemological grounds and of preserving the political engagements of our scientific work. These discussions have led to the current, truly wonderful moment where anthropologists are participating in praxis in the public sphere. Many more are paying careful attention to writing and engaging multimodal practices, developing new and exciting ways to make knowledge accessible that facilitates interaction with many different audiences. Light in dark times, rooted in these intellectual concerns and conversations, in these socio-cultural formations and political circumstances and events, enters in this moment and in good company with new efforts among scholars to engage the graphic form. Even as our graphic novel emerged in this context, it has an origin story that is unique to itself and to serendipity. It begins deep in the secluded world of academe. Charlotte and I had not met before when I stepped onto a ballroom stage in early December of 2017 to close out my term as president of the American Anthropological Association. In the presidential address, I reflected on that moment of being in the world and in anthropology. No doubt these are dark times, I declared. Little did I know how bad it would get. I asked of myself and of the audience, what of us in these times? How will we pass the time that is given us on earth? In dialogue with Hannah Arendt and Bertolt Brecht, I then explored some meanings and implications of being introspective, of thinking in dark times, of truth, lies, and the danger of the trivial, and of envisioning and acting to create an alternative world from that within which we now dwell. The next morning, I received this most beautiful gift from Charlotte. She had drawn a spectacular rendition of the talk, capturing the spirit and details of my words, the light as golden, and the darkness in all its fury and dangerousness, the specks of red, the cotton wool that obscures, the rich store of world knowledge and a rushing movement outwards. By January of the new year, Charlotte and I began a collaboration, meeting weekly by Skype and then later in person when Charlotte came from the UK to live with me in New York for months-long periods over the course of 2018. We analyzed other graphic books to assess their infrastructures and their elements. How many pages altogether? How many images on the page? How long each chapter? What shaped the narrative arc? How are characters presented? We each deconstructed my written document, pulling out what seemed the key points of each line, paragraph, and section. We came together to compare notes, discuss, and take the project to the next level. Over time, we got to know one another and our individual working styles, two temperaments enjoined in an ever-growing and enthusiastic commitment to the project. Slowly, we transformed a speech directed to an audience of anthropologists into a graphic novel designed for students of the world looking to understand the darkness and what they and we might do to transform it. Eventually, the story we developed unfolded as encounters with writers, philosophers, activists, and anthropologists of the past and of the present, some recognizable, others unfamous. Virginia Woolf and Vivian Gornick, Hannah Arendt and Bertolt Brecht, Sherry Ortner, Roger Berkowitz, Peg Birmingham, Roger Lancaster, Eben Kirksey, Carolyn Nordstrom, Paul Farmer, Brian Stevenson, and Eduardo Galeano. Some people say that light in dark times is prescient. I say, as others have also, that the troubles of our world have been long in place, now broken wide open. Among many others, Carolyn Nordstrom in 2009 saw disaster coming in her concept of global fractures, which captures the fragility and unsustainability of the world where no one is invulnerable to the quakes along the lines. Light in Dark Times invites readers and viewers to explore those political catastrophes and moral disasters that bring outrage and sometimes despair, and that still beg to be identified, studied, revealed, understood, confronted, and resisted. The book is a lament over the darkness of the times, an urgent plea to go to the dark place, sit with it, and confront it. It is an affirmation of the value of knowledge that comes from anthropology, as well as from the arts, humanities, and philosophy. An affirmation that may inspire readers to study more deeply the issues identified in the book, including but not limited to books and other writings written by the characters, works that are listed in the graphic novel's curated bibliography. It is responsive to the call that anthropologists engage praxis in the public sphere. And it is designed, hopefully, to inspire readers and viewers to take action on behalf of a livable future. It is an effort to bring together serious scholarship and contemporary aesthetics, elevating the graphic genre by presenting complex philosophical and political themes in a mixed media format. The greatest challenge to conveying and communicating the ideas and issues with which Light in Dark Times grapples has to do with the very complexity of the concepts and the painfulness of the real life, human consequences of the socio-political economic conditions the book depicts. The graphic form helps address these challenges because it does not privilege writing over other forms of constructing and representing knowledge, enabling the reader, viewer, to grasp meaning from the different multi-layered ways the writer and the artist evoke it. This is a most intense period for the world, considering the material, environmental, and political conditions of life in these times. Light in Dark Times offers a reflection of what the world is and has been. At the same time, it provides a way of learning about the world. It reflects my moral commitments and ethical positions in which human needs are prioritized over rapacious interests. These commitments are not hidden in Façon's black box, but are made explicit. They are revealed in the choices I have made about who to profile, what scholarship to emphasize, what questions to ask, what modes of communication to use, and what challenges to propose across the trajectory of the unfolding narrative in this work. Published less than a year ago, the book has now entered its public afterlife, its reception by readers and viewers. Early indicators suggest that Light in Dark Times resonates with those who have seen it, giving us hope that this graphic book of art and anthropology might indeed prove useful to the future of anthropology and to help heal a deeply troubled world. Another challenge, though, is how to get the book past gatekeepers in the popular culture and into the hands of more readers. And now let us get Charlotte's perspective. Charlotte, of course, is the artist whose talents ensured that this book would be beautiful to look at and to hold. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alisse. It is so wonderful to be here, and yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Ashley, for hosting. And I am Charlotte Corden. Nice to meet you all. And it's been a while for Alisse and I. We have done a few of these, well, quite a few of these talks last year after the book got published, and then there's been the whole summer, and this is the first one we've done for a while, so I haven't seen Alisse for ages. So it's just wonderful to hear you speak about the book again, and it's wonderful to be with you all and bring my perspective as the artist to you. Great. So I'm going to talk you through my experience of making this incredible book with Alisse, and how we went about creating it, the processes that we used, and also the thoughts that I had about communicating these difficult topics, because illustrating something like radical evil is obviously quite tricky if you've never attempted to do anything like that before. Even if you have, it's still probably pretty tricky. So I'm going to give you as many glimpses into the book as I can. As I go, you'll see from Alisse's presentation, there will be text on the screen from the images in the book, and I want to try and give you time to read it, but at the same time I may end up just going a bit faster than that. So I just hope that you can kind of get a sense of the images at least. I do think it's worth getting a copy of the book if you haven't already, if you're really interested in it. Like the book as a whole is a beautiful thing to read, and you'll really get a sense then of what we're actually trying to communicate. The other thing I want to say before I start is I love to encourage people to draw, and if you have a scrap piece of paper, it doesn't have to be plain, it can be lined, it can be whatever, and a pen handy, I would say, as I'm talking, just have a go at drawing what I'm trying to say, or drawing one idea, or just doodling, and as you listen and see where your drawing takes you. It could be that at the end of this, actually, you have also created something out of this in response to it. And yeah, I'd love to hear about that at the end if you have. As Alisse has described, this work is a serendipitous confluence of her highly valuable anthropological perspective on how to grapple and live in the world during these dark times, and my own ambition to push drawing to its farthest extent so as to describe the philosophies and real world that we live in as accurately as possible, without actually drawing the specifics of being in a particular location in the world. So that was my first challenge when we began to draw, was to understand, how do I draw the world without being in any particular location? And you'll see as we go through that the world is sort of an abstract plane in which our characters walk through. This book began as a big experiment with the ambition that the combination of Alisse's beautiful text and my illustration would be able to depict her meaning as honestly as possible, and so as to help the reader go beyond both what the text and illustration can do separately, and encourage people to investigate and capture more of the holistic picture that we were attempting to present to the world. The night that Alisse gave this speech to 1,000 anthropologists, Alisse, I apologize, I didn't tell you that I was putting this image of you in. This is Alisse giving the speech. Yeah, that night I was in the audience watching her and listening to her, and I became absolutely transported by her words, their rich imagery and the honest human experience of our world that she described. She spoke about ideas that I immediately wanted to know more about, like darkness hidden in plain sight. This was one of the first images I created that I sketched out in rough format to try and understand how it was I was going to illustrate these darknesses. She spoke about the obfuscation of trivia, the cotton wool of purposeful political obfuscation and pointless trivia that make it almost impossible for people to see what is going on in the world. She spoke about Hannah Arendt's expression, the will to resist. This is Hannah Arendt here with the white hair, pushing back the darkness, the will to resist. She spoke about the hopelessness that we feel in our own insignificant abilities. I really connected with this this part of her speech where she said that, but believing in our own marginality seems a safe retreat that masks our privileges and too easily relieves us of responsibility. She highlighted the importance of lament and offered the words to say when conflicted by the inequalities of our blatant privileges that become so obvious when held up against the suffering of so many in these times. And amidst all the darkness, she spoke of the powerful hope we have in our collective ability to work towards a process of mutual understanding on a gigantic scale. So in the years leading up to this moment at which me and Alisse met and then created the book, I had been studying anthropology at University College London, and I had begun to use drawing in my notes as a way of unraveling complex philosophical ideas. So you can see on the 28th of January here, there's a photo taken from a notebook, and I was studying the anthropology of architecture, and we were talking about the difference between place and space. And as the lecturer spoke, I created this sort of drawing that I was trying to understand the difference between it and visually represent that difference. Same here, like this was me reading a book. I think it was one of Tim Ingalls' book, and it was talking about lines, and moving along is one thing and journeying like through or something is quite another. And I was trying to visually represent what these things meant. So drawing had become this essential tool for thinking. And I began to believe that it can be used not just as a mean to describe, but also as a mean to discover how to see anew. And I used the page as a way to visualize and place relationships between ideas on the page, and so attempt to describe the meaning beyond words more effectively. So I wanted to just grapple visually with the ideas of things rather than just write notes in text. So at that moment, if we go back to that moment of Alisse giving her speech, she just offered me a very visually rich, complex and meaningful message. And it was my ideal starting point for an illustration. And this is the illustration that I created that night. You would have seen it in Alisse's PowerPoint just now. And I wanted to understand and pull apart visually the pieces that put her speech together. I needed to see what the image was underneath her message, and I wanted to find the visual thread that knit her words together. So months later, when Alisse got in touch and we decided to do the project together, we had begun, and I came to stay with Alisse in New York. I was from London at that point. I'm now near London. And I went to stay with her in her basement. She was very, very generous, and we started our project there. And it was incredible because I now had the opportunity to go deeply into every phrase and every meaning that she had said in her speech and join it together visually. I have a video of This Is Us, and this is an image of the basement. You can see Alisse down here on the left. We had this wall of which I would just sort of approach and sketch the next few pages, and then Alisse would tell me what the next part of the speech was, and we'd figure out page by page what we were going to put on each page and what writing was going to go where, and then I would quickly sketch something if I had an idea in mind, and then we'd move on to the next page. So this is a fast forward time lapse of what it was like one day working there. It was really important, this process of coming up to the wall and coming back again and being able to see the book all around us. You can see we've hung up pages all around the room, and every space that we could, we ended up hanging these pages of the book. And we were able to actually then look around and see the book as a whole, all the way around the room, which helped give us perspective on, which pages were going to be really important and hardly have any words on it at all, and a massive amount of images, and which pages were going to be, full of text actually, and going to be describing things more in text rather than image related. So we were able to together work on that like that, and it was just so wonderful to be together in that process. We would not have been able to create this book had we not spent all of those hours together in the basement creating it. And for me, it was really important that the images I created were a true reflection of the meaning behind her words. I'll play it again just while I tell you about this bit. How does one begin to draw concepts like radical evil or trivia or the will to resist? And there were moments of great frustration as I sought to illustrate what the consequences of detachment versus engagement looked like, or the power that makes human beings superfluous. The question I would often ask myself, oh, just lost my place. The question I would often ask myself was, how much of a realistic portrayal of events should I attempt, and how much should I keep the visuals abstracted and generalized? For example, I had originally sketched radical evil on the left-hand side as a character of darkness with this gruesome face-like grin. But in context with Alisse's words, it was far too cartoon-like. The seriousness and reality of radical evil and Hannah Arendt's writings about radical evil had to be honored. And so the illustration became this disturbing picture on the right-hand side of human beings being made less than human, which was much, I hope, much closer to the reality that Hannah Arendt writes about. Light and Dark Times is my first significant attempt as an artist to investigate how drawn images can enhance the truth of words and bring a different understanding of their meaning. I used every faculty and technique of drawing that I'd been taught to put together scenes and scenarios that were representative of all of the different ideas being spoken about. And at the same time, trying to tie the book together as a whole with this strip of light and using light and darkness as a way to link it all together. An example of a moment in which I had a bit of a revelation about how to draw something that was pretty difficult to come up with was this one. I was pacing around the room trying to figure out how to draw how one discovers knowledge, how one gets to some kind of truth. And I just had this moment like that where it hit me, and I knew that what I had to draw was what I was actually doing. Because what I was doing was what I was trying to draw. And it was this incredible moment. I was sort of circular truth going round and around my brain. I thought, gosh, I'm literally going to draw me and Alisse walking around in circles and coming to an understanding of illumination as one walks and looks and sees and perceives more and sees more. So this was a wonderful moment of revelation during the process. At the time, I was aware that this experimentation of using drawing as a tool for discovery had been written about and used amongst a few other anthropologists. And I want to share with you a few of the people that influenced this work for me. First is Nitsusanis in his book, Unflattening, talks about this process that we draw not to describe ideas from our heads, but to generate them in search of greater understanding. And if you haven't come across his book before, Unflattening, I would really recommend you take a look. It's an incredible graphic work that really unwraps some deep philosophical understanding and like sociological understanding of our world. And yeah, it's a brilliant graphic piece. So he was a great inspiration. And then before creating Light and Dark Times, I had read Michael Tausig's book, I Swear I Saw This. And he details the deep and rich understanding that can be gained from study of reflection on one's drawings that are created in the research field. So he talks about this drawing in the book where he was in a subway kind of bypass, and he, for a few seconds, saw this lady sewing up this man in a sleeping bag. And he quickly created a sketch of it, and then later on goes to reflect on that sketch and reflect on, and from the reflection gains quite a lot of understanding of what was going on in that context. So he details this deep and rich understanding that can be gained from studied reflection on one's drawings that are created in the field. And to draw with the intention to know more, to use drawing as a tool not just for recording, but for investigating and thinking, is for him to use drawing in its most powerful form. And the wonderful thing about drawing is that to do this, you do not need a great skill in draftsmanship. It requires this childlike, playful freedom of depicting what, as best you can, the object of your gaze. So certainly it's within Light and Dark Times. This is a picture of one of the sketches that we created in the basement. I really was just playing with the drawing, depicting Elisse's words as best I could in the moment. But these initial sketches were so loose, and the drawings, you can see that they were just barely there. They were like thoughts on a page rushed through, and then, you know, we're on to the next bit, and I'm just trying to detail out what's going on each page, but, you know, we don't have a lot of time to consider exactly what things look like yet. We had to go pretty fast to get through all the content. Here's another page of that. And I knew that when I came back to it, like Tausig, I was going to be able to reflect much more deeply on each page, but have an understanding of the whole book at that point that I would really need, so that I knew how each page was going to relate to the next. Just for context, you can see on the right-hand side, that particular sketch became this page. I'll just go back so you can see that a little more. So this sketch here contains the raw material for a process of mutual understanding on a grand scale. And we actually changed the words to, it contains the raw material for a process of mutual understanding on a gigantic scale. That's the story. So as well as Tausig, I was also aware of another anthropologist, Tim Ingold, who his use of drawing, he uses drawing as a means to simultaneously observe and describe. And in his book, Redrawing Anthropology, which is where this little streak comes from, he describes watching a salmon jump a waterfall and depicts the movement with this hand-drawn line. To garner understanding from this line, one has to follow it, to relive the motion of drawing with the same observation as the artist, and thus see the original thrilling leap of the salmon through the torrent of water. This example illustrates an aspect of drawing that, as an artist, I am constantly investigating: the traceable human touch. Ingold's drawing is different to Tausig's in that he did not attempt to draw the visual context around the mark. He didn't draw the stream, he didn't draw the fish, but with a moment's touch of the pen on paper and a small flick of expression, he abstracted all that he needed. And abstraction is wonderful for describing gesture in this way. The artist Paul Klee famously talked of taking a line for a walk, a description that encompasses both the simplicity of embracing abstraction and the meaningful human gesture that is left behind whenever we create any kind of trace on the page. The lines themselves do not represent a symbolic significance. In this drawing, it is the human trace left behind in the line that is what I'm reflecting on. So like the cave of hands in Argentina made 9,000 years ago, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, drawing for me holds the same kind of embodied knowledge now as it did then. This is the vital and valuable distinction that drawing has over photography and film. All our inherited institutionalized knowledge from previous generations is developed, reformed, reanalyzed and captured anew with ever developing technologies, cameras, drones, and an ever faster connection to the body of our collective information. Yet, when one takes the time to draw a line, or a fish jumping, or a person at the side of the road in infinite detail, the infinite detail of life and our meager attempts to capture and understand it are made glaringly obvious. Drawing resets the parameters of knowledge and places us directly in context with those persons that painted hands on the cave 9,000 years ago. Drawing, if used with honest reflection, is an invaluable tool for society because it is able to cut through the accumulation of cultural capital and reposition our gaze to include the greater detail of life, which might perhaps reach beyond the assimilation of one's present understanding. In light and dark times, our intention was to use illustration as a way of breaking the boundary between academic writing and the graphic genre in order to open up the discussion and engagement with what are some of the most profound and important questions we must ask ourselves in our lifetime. What does it mean to be human? Repositioning the gaze to include some of the detail that Alisse describes is so easily obscured by trivia. At every stage, it was Alisse's writing that inspired the drawing, and it is no exaggeration to say Alisse's words have changed my life. She has taught me how to think with a new perspective. Through investigating how to draw prejudice, I have had to face my own prejudices. Often when I see events taking place on the news, in my mind, I turn to the relevant page of Light and Dark Times, lamenting that even anger against injustice makes the voice grow harsh. Thinking that to make a difference, I must get proximate to human suffering. And when I see swathes of people acting in ways I can barely comprehend, I think back to Alisse's words. They are afraid of annihilation and desire protection. And I know I must turn to myself and ask the central question, how do I want to be human? The illustrations that make up Light and Dark Times grapple with some of the most profound and difficult issues facing our world today. Through drawing them, we have tried to make sense of the calamities that dominate our society and offer a stream of light to those who dare to dream of a better future. Our hope is that these issues and ideas, visualized as they are, might help others to see anew and inspire fresh possibilities in a world where seeing the truth has become increasingly difficult, but where coming together with mutual understanding on a gigantic scale is still well within our reach. Thank you all for listening to me. And if you want to follow us on Instagram, we do have an Instagram account at Light and Dark Times Book. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. That wonderful description, and likewise, Alisse. We have some questions that have come in, so I'll just start with them. Let me just say to our audience that it's easier for me to manage that if you present your questions or pose your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat line. It's kind of hard to track both at the same time. The first question from an anonymous attendee starts with a statement and ends with a question. He or she says, when I wrote my graduate thesis on social justice issues, I was advised not to assign color to historic times, rather encouraged to say challenging or unjust or difficult rather than dark. Even though many recognize dark history as a term like gravity, and we all know what it is, even if it's difficult to articulate, would you consider the advice I got to be progressive or nitpicking semantics, and why?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, well, firstly, I guess I would say, I don't want to answer the question with, your question with a question, but I kind of have to, which is, so I would have a better understanding of what the problem is with dark, the notion of darkness versus light. I don't think of dark or darkness as a color, but as a shade. And in our work, of course, I was in conversation with Hannah Arendt in her famous book, Men in Dark Times, in which she also includes, in which there is a chapter on Bertolt Brecht as well. And there, I think it's a metaphor for as you I'm sure understand, the array of difficult circumstances that we dwell in and we face and we must face that are human made. And the contrast with light is about, and this is what we do in the book, there are several pages around what the light is about illumination. So for me, anthropology, for example, what I got out of that discipline when I first came into it, I was in the dark in the sense of not understanding the world around me. And that's sort of my motivation for studying anthropology, the study of humankind. I wanted to understand what was unclear to me. And the discipline cast a light on things so that it helped me come to understanding and illumination. So those are the ways in which I use or I think of those terms. It's hard for me to answer the question as you've asked it, which is whether it's nitpicking or progressive, because I'm not thinking about it in those terms.
The questioner has followed up. She says, I gathered that the person who was advising me was concerned about racial connotations. Interestingly, maybe you saw John McMurder's comment on language battles over the light and dark or brown and black in a recent New York Times column. She says, your take on dark and light was how I approached the phrase too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amy has a question that you partially addressed. She says, how did you determine the balance of words versus illustrations to move the narrative along?
So I'll start that, and then maybe Charlotte can jump in too. That was, as I hope we sort of captured in the presentation, in which we wanted to give you a sense of our process. That kind of question was something we struggled with on a day-to-day basis. And part of what we did, or one of the steps we took in the very beginning was to look at other graphic books to see how they were done. When we looked to see, how many words are on a page, how many images, how many times are the images in a series of boxes or one image? How do they do it? And then how do we want to do it? And sometimes there were really nitty gritty questions like how long should and folks who publish know that you have to pay attention to word counts or how large the book is going to be in order for it to be accepted and acceptable to your publisher. So we looked at that, like how long should this book be? And we wanted the book to be in full color, by the way. And if you look at graphic books, they're mostly in black and white. That's, I think, a publishing issue as well as an aesthetic issue because it's about cost to publish. We were very lucky to have the University of Toronto Press support us fully on that, and they produced a high quality book for us. But that question that you ask is something we dealt with until we felt that we got to the right balance. Charlotte, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Everything Alisse says, absolutely. And it was a day-to-day process. I think because neither of us had ever created anything like this before, we weren't constraining ourselves with the amount of pages we were going to have. And that was actually really useful in this process, in that we could just keep adding pages in. Like if we got to a bit that we thought, actually, this deserves a whole page and this needs a full illustration on this page, then we could just add that. We weren't limited to, 50 or to, 60. It was whatever we wanted to come up with. And that was a great freedom. Other than that, it is just about a sense of the whole. I think when we were stood in the basement and we had all of these papers all around us, I was gauging visually, all right, okay, so there's going to be 4 or 5 pages in the book that hardly have any words on at all. And what are they saying visually? Is the visualization of that page going to be more dominant like, is the message of that page going to be better communicated because there are less words? And I think that's always the key question to ask, is like, what is the meaning behind what's being said supported by more or less words on the page? And that's kind of how we divided it up.
Elaine has a question where she starts with a statement that she applauds your effort. It goes on, with so much happening, especially from the dark side, it's important to find new ways to reach everyday folks. How do you feel about pop culture, archaeology, or anthropology, such as that found on the History Channel or elsewhere? How about popular fiction? Does it help or hurt efforts to rise above our shortfalls?
Wow, that is a wonderful question. And I think it's something that reflects a challenge for all of us, because on the one hand, I think it's really great that there is more and more popular culture embracing the knowledge that we can offer. And I think it's also wonderful that more and more anthropologists are trying to move into those spaces. It's really important. However, the other side of it is that sometimes how it gets translated is not conveying our intended meaning. And so we end up with more distortion. So then, oh, maybe we should have just not bothered to try to get into that, whether it's the History Channel or something else. But I do think our new media tools are really important and useful, even if they're very difficult to maintain. You know, Charlotte mentioned we have an Instagram page, but it's so hard with all our other obligations to keep it up. So those anthropologists, I mean, I'm thinking Agustin Fuentes, for example, he's so on Twitter, and I love that. And when I go on Twitter every once in a while, I retweet what he's tweeted. Anyway, I just what I'm trying to say is that I think there's great opportunities there, and that we cannot be on the sidelines. We have to be engaged and participating in these arenas, and at the same time, we have to insist on the quality of the the output, if you will. And I think it's challenging because we're just getting to the table, and so I don't know how much say we have in terms of the final products.
Elaine has a follow-up question that's relevant to that. Who was your target audience? I mean, Toronto must have asked you who your target audience was before they committed to an expensive project like this.
So that's interesting, and I wish we had the image. Maybe I could find it quickly, but probably not. She's so good. So in our proposal, I actually asked Charlotte to draw a picture of our target audiences, and in the form of a series of circles. So it's a circle, and at the center were the audience, the main audience were are anthropologists, anthropology students, undergraduate and graduate students, and professors and other scholars. That was our pinpoint core audience, which, by the way, we seem to be reaching, because according to our publisher, the book has been adopted in something like 40 classes already, which is pretty fantastic. And by the way, we're always available to join a class if folks want us to. But then our secondary group is students and professors in relevant other disciplines, from sociology to literature and philosophy and history. Oh, there she goes. Isn't this amazing? And then our tertiary target is graphic novel and graphic comics readers, and readers of serious nonfiction. And that tertiary target is our biggest challenge, because, and this is why one of the remarks I made towards the end of my talk, which is how do we get to them? Yes, there is the social media platforms. Yes, our publisher is wonderful in terms of doing outreach and marketing. But there are gatekeepers out there, and how do we get our book in, to be reviewed by the New York Times? We tried. How do we get our book to get, mentioned in the New Yorker? I mean, that's just two examples. And I think that's a challenge for all of us who are trying to do crossover works.
There's a question from an anonymous attendee. Did the color scheme change at all during the writing process?
Charlotte, why don't you take that?
Yeah, it did a little, actually. So initially we were going to do a similar color scheme to the initial illustration that I created of Allisse's speech on that night. You saw it with the darkness coming in. It was far more sort of golden and dark, and with each person in all the little figures in red. And then as we went along the way, I started playing around with, well, how do I create darkness but also have it with color? And the reason why we went for like quite a purpley blue, or the reason why I ended up choosing that, was because we introduced this idea of light, and I wanted to use the complementary color system to use darkness on the page that was more of a purpley blue rather than a black, black. I'm not describing this very, I'm sorry. There were lots of different problems and not problems, but things to solve in creating this book. One of which was, when you are drawing darkness, you want to use black to represent the darkness. But the problem with that is that obviously anything that's in black is very hard to determine, like to put anything else in there unless it's very white. And so I played a lot with different tones of dark for the book, in order that both light objects and dark objects would be able to show up on the page. So I was working in a lot of the mid-tone arenas, and when I started to use a lot of the mid-tone colors, that's when I ended up choosing the purpley blues versus the kind of more of the non-tone shades. That answers the
That's
question.
helpful. Jana has a statement and then a question. Thank you for sharing your beautiful work. Is it possible to not think of light and dark as binaries, where dark is bad and light is good? For example, as my colleague Laura McTeague has pointed out, darkness can be an important space from which social justice organizing emerges, and light can signify the violence of surveillance that renders certain people illegible. McTeague suggests that perhaps our role as anthropologists could be to learn to see in the dark, to adjust our eyes to the dark. And then there's a link to that, some of that work, I presume, added to the statement. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's great, and I thank you for the insight and the link, which I would definitely check out. Yeah, I mean, look, this particular work is what it is, and it is what we have chosen to do, and these were our, decisions to make. And yes, we were aware of the binary, in terms of light and darkness, but we played around with it, which I hope you get a chance to take a look at, to see the ways in which it was executed. And really that again, I'll go back to what I said earlier about illumination, and that the light, was that doesn't mean to say that, that it can't be, there can't be another way of presenting the kinds of concepts or related concepts, in a different kind of, selection of elements, the design of the drawings, the color scheme, the shade scheme, the words. I mean, I started with Hannah Arendt. That's when I sat down to work on this, my talk, my presidential address. I was immersing myself in her works, and of course her, Men in Dark Times is such a famous work, and then there is the Bard the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College, they had produced a work that was really useful to me too, which is called Thinking in Dark Times. And so that was the direction I went in, and used that as my metaphor for reflecting on the dark times of the past and the present.
Paul Ryer, who's the head of our scholar program, has the following statement and question. First, he thanks you both for your presentation. I was reminded of the first time my wife, who's trained as an artist, visited my field site, in which I'd been embedded for 2 years at that point. But I was shocked by how many interesting things she saw that I'd never noticed. It was both humbling and enlightening. You've spoken about Charlotte working to illuminate Alisse's words. Did the reverse happen also during your collaboration?
Thank you for that. That is so awesome. Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that part of our dynamic, and when I said in my presentation that we got used to each other's temperaments and styles of working and those kinds of things, it was sort of, then I looked at Charlotte when I said those words and smiled, because it was definitely, an interactivity. I sat on that couch and I would talk, and Charlotte pressed me. She would say, well, what do you mean by that? I don't even understand it. Explain it to me. And so she put me on the spot where I would have to really think through and be able to express my own way, because I'm not an artist, so I couldn't go up on the board and draw it, but using words to try to articulate what my intended meaning was. And so it was this give and take constantly. But then beyond that was also seeing the ways in which Charlotte transformed an idea into an image, which so often just made it richer for me. So I would say it isn't so much that in this particular project that, I didn't see X, Y, or Z, but I could see these ideas, these circumstances deeply because of the images.
We end with a final question. It's a good one from David. Have you considered animation as the next step in your experimentation? Why or why not?
It is on our to-do list. So is Charlotte.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I've dabbled in a bit of animation myself, doing a few kind of 2-minute videos, and I would love to see this animated. I think there would be a whole nother level of understanding gained through an animation of Light and Dark Times. But the hours put into the tiny amount of, all of the drawings, if you were going to hand draw each animation and keep it kind of in the style of the book, then yeah, it would be, I couldn't do it. I think what we haven't really spoken about was just how we funded this project. And actually, we both went into this kind of 50-50, whatever was going to come out of it, in terms of what we earned. We were going to split 50-50 down the line, but it was definitely a risk that we both took on together. And actually, this was a labor of love. It was something that we both felt actually needed to be in the world. The world needed to have this this piece, and quite often we would say we feel like this book is just creating itself. We were both there, making it happen, but there were just so many moments at which it was just like, wow, we can't believe that this is happening. And so, yeah, animation would be it would be a great step if we had the funding. But I think to have the funding for that kind of piece of work it would just cost an enormous amount. So I'm not sure we'd be able to get it.
Well, can I just add something to that last part of it, which is, it's about resources. And actually, since we've published this book, I've gotten several calls and emails from people asking to talk to me about how we did this, just in terms of the nitty gritty. How could you afford to do this? And did you get funding, which we did not. I did look for funding to see if there was, but there aren't any real resources for supporting a project like this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But our publisher University of Toronto Press this is in the ethnographic series of University of Toronto Press, and they are very much interested in being crossover publishers, not just scholarly press, but also trade press. And they're experimenting, I don't know if that's the right word, with ethnographic and some other of their lines. And they even attended, for example, this year, some event in Canada that's related to, that's a connection with filmmakers. And there were 3 companies that were interested in our book, possibly in animation. Of course, we never heard anything since then, and that's the way those things go so often, but we're game. This is exactly the kind of thing. How do we, when I said before, how do we get to the gatekeepers? I know there's so much good material out there in the world. There's so many great novels. There's so many good history books. There's so many interesting new works in anthropology. And, how do you rise above the clutter and get the attention of somebody who would be really interested in helping us turn this book into an animation, a little animated feature? That would be awesome. But I don't really know. I've been around the block with other things, but I have no idea how to enter that world.
Well, as a labor of love, I think it's memorable and remarkably successful, and I congratulate you for that. And I thank you both for participating in this event for SAR. Thanks again. We'll end there and continue the conversation with SAR members in about 45 minutes. Thank you both.
And thank you very, very much. And to everybody who attended.
Thank you, everybody.